The beautiful bride, the favorite daughter of King Edward III of England, was eagerly awaited on the Spanish coast. Joanna of England was to become the wife of the heir to Castile and Leon, 14-year-old Pedro. The alliance was going to be great. England received an ally in the south, which at the time of the war with France was a very good decision. The Spanish also did not miss. Joanna carried on their ships a huge dowry, and the princess was beautiful and well-educated. But, alas, on the way, the English beauty contracted the plague and died near the shores of Bordeaux. Prince Pedro never saw his delightful bride. Castilian Infante Pedro was born in August 1334th year in Burgos. His father, King Alfonso XI, was so indifferent to his mother, the Portuguese Princess Maria, that a year after the birth of his son, the young woman returned to her native home. She categorically refused to go to her husband, who openly lived with his mistress Leonora. However, the King of Portugal was not going to bear the insult inflicted on his daughter. Several years he sought from the Pope to recognize the behavior of the King of Castile unworthy, set against the son-in-law of his own subjects, and at the end even went to war on him. Defamed the honor of Maria of Portugal was saved. Mistress Leonora was sent to a convent. The King of Castile himself was busy with other things, saving the border regions of his kingdom from the Moors. All those who stood in his way were subjected to cruel torture and execution. His son by Maria of Portugal probably inherited from him a genetic predisposition to cruelty. The prince was characterized by a fiery temper, always bent his line, and very selective about the people around him. In justice to his mother, which allowed his father, he recognized as unparabolic, and for this reason warmly regarded Mary of Portugal. But her favorite, Wanda Albuquerque, tolerated with difficulty. But much more difficult had to put up with the prince with the presence of an incredible number of illegitimate brothers. These bastards, which spawned his father and Leonora, were a threat to him. The King of Castile could easily pass the throne to any of them, and it was coming to that. The eldest son by his mistress seemed to the king a much more worthy contender than a legitimate son. Enrique had no tendency to violence, behaved prudently, and could negotiate with people. Pedro was annoyed at this turn of events. The bastard is trying to take his place. And then there's the failed alliance with the English, Joanna Plantagenet's untimely death. However, his mother suggested another option, to try to marry the Princess of Navarre. There were songs about Blanca's beauty, and her kingdom was right next door. Not a bad option either. But even here, Pedro was disappointed. The alliance with the Castilian heir to the throne in Navarre was not considered too tempting. Firstly, Pedro's throne was not guaranteed, and secondly, the Navarrians did not want to shed blood for a foreigner. Therefore, the beautiful Blanca was soon married to the French king, and Pedro was again left without a bride. But he was already in a lot of trouble. His father had died of the plague, as had his first bride Joanna, and now he was to take the throne. The oldest of the bastards, Enrique, predictably disagreed and claimed his rights. At first things were going well for Pedro. With intrigue, gold, and blackmail, his mother and her favorite were able to pacify the Castilian nobility. For this important support, Pedro easily agreed to Maria of Portugal's condition to execute his father's longtime mistress. Leonora, a nun who at that time lived quietly in her monastery, was beheaded. This act did not add to the popularity of Pedro, but his mother was pleased. As for the romantic ties of King Pedro, he met and fell in love with Maria de Padilla. It was a true passion, so strong that the ruler of Castile and Leon secretly married Maria a year later. One by one they had 4 children, but the queen mother did not approve of this union. In her opinion, her son should still find a real princess, so, secretly from him, began negotiations with the French court. The first candidate was the same Blanca of Navarre, who had already rejected Pedro once. Now she was the widow of the French king, but did not wish to change the white mourning dress for a scarlet wedding dress. Another princess from Paris, Blanca de Bourbon, was offered as an alternative. The girl belonged to the royal family, famous for malleable character and came from a very fertile family. Blanca de Bourbon came to Castile and married Pedro, but he was already married to Maria. They played a decent wedding, but 3 days after the marriage, the girl was sent away from the eyes of the king in the fortress of Arevalo. Without explaining anything, without accusing her of anything, Pedro simply imprisoned his wife in a real prison. The king himself went to his mistress, Maria de Padilla, and was surprised to learn that, as it turns out, most of the nobility resented his action. Open confrontation began. Many of those who opposed Pedro were killed. Unexpectedly, the Pope of Rome showed himself. He had already heard rumors of a strange incident with Blanca de Bourbon. He threatened to excommunicate Pedro and his mistress, and relatives of the princess demanded to restore Blanca to the rights of the Queen of Castile when the news of her tragic death came. Most likely, the unwanted queen was killed in her fortress, but the true cause of her death no one could not learn. According to the most widespread version, the young woman was shot with a crossbow. Maria de Padilla was terrified. She realized that Blanca's relatives would take revenge. She saw how serious Rome was. But most importantly, the Castilian majority no longer supported Pedro. By his actions, he had alienated even his mother's favorite, thanks to which he had long kept afloat. The king's mistress went into a convent. Soon died Maria of Portugal. Pedro had fewer and fewer supporters. Curiously, but the king made another attempt to marry. He married Juana de Castro, who also left a few days after the wedding. Juana was only formally considered sovereign. In fact, her life was spent in the holy cloisters. In 1369 year, in Toledo rebellion broke out. The nobles supported the bastard Enrique de Trastamare. In his veins still flowed the blood of the late king. It is said that Enrique himself killed Pedro and proclaimed himself king. From him came the dynasty of Trastamara. Several centuries occupied various European thrones. Pedro the Cruel's widow was not persecuted. She died quietly after 10. Even before Pedro's assassination, Juana de Castro gave birth to an only son, who of course had more right to the throne than his bastard uncle. The boy had a bad fate. He lived all his short life in confinement, thus paying for the cruelty and unreasonable actions of his father.